Good day everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Paul van Aubel, and I'm a PhD student and lecturer at the Digital Security Department of the Institute for Computing and Information Sciences at Radboud University in Nijmegen in the Netherlands. And today I want to talk to you a bit about how the use of compression might actually be breaking the privacy guarantees that you think encryption is providing for you. So the work I'm presenting here is joint work with a colleague of mine, Erik, and we did this at the request of Alliander, a Dutch distribution system operator. This work is in the context of the Dutch smart grid, so allow me to briefly introduce that first. So the smart grid is the electricity grid for electricity distribution, keeping the lights on everywhere, except we've added sensors to it and enabled fine-grained control so that we know better what's happening in the grid and can control it at a more local level, which is especially important in this modern age of distributed generation with solar panels and wind farms and fluctuating demand with electric vehicles and the like. Now in the Netherlands, one important component we've added to the grid is a smart meter. A smart meter is a household energy meter which takes measurements, well, of the energy use of a household, and then rather than the user having to input those measurements once a year at their energy supplier, what happens instead is the smart meter sends those measurements over a wireless or wired link to the distribution system operators, the ones actually controlling the physical infrastructure of the energy grid, and they in turn send that information to a central access server, which can then be queried by the energy suppliers to determine how much they should bill you, or by independent service providers, which, well, name says it all, provide independent services, like how much energy did you use over the course of a day, where can you have additional savings, etc. So we have this nice information loop of the household energy meter providing the information that the energy suppliers and the independent service providers need to bill you or give you additional feedback. Now the right side of this image isn't too interesting today. We're mostly interested in this energy flow here, from the smart meter to the distribution system operator, and in particular the link between them. So in the Netherlands, this is nowadays usually a wireless link over a telephone network, and well, what the smart meter does is it takes a measurement every 15 minutes, but rather than send it immediately, it batches all the measurements of an entire day, so 96 measurements, and it sends those as a single message around midnight to the DSO. Now, when the system was first introduced in the Netherlands, or well, proposed in 2008, it ran into a brick wall of privacy concerns. In particular, it ran afoul of Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which states that everyone has the right to respect for his private and family life, his home and his correspondence. And there shall be no interference by a public authority except such as in accordance with the law and necessary in a democratic society. And so the Dutch First Chamber of Parliament basically said, well, what this law says, you haven't argued that it is necessary in a democratic society. And what they found problematic in particular was A, that the smart meter was mandatory for everyone, and B, that the 15-minute measurements were mandatory. So they voted the law down, back to the drawing board. 2 years later, a revised version was introduced and passed. And the key difference that allowed it to pass was that A, the smart meters weren't mandatory anymore. You could opt out of having one installed. And B, the 15-minute measurements were now opt-in. By default, it will only take one measurement a month and send that to the DSO. Now, fast forward 10 years, and smart meters are basically everywhere, and we are incentivizing everyone to take, well, to still get one anyway. But the 15-minute measurements have remained opt-in. So the 15-minute measurements are still not the default. Now, we can argue all day about the privacy implications of this entire system, but what I want to focus on today is that these 15-minute measurements are personal information that should be protected. That is a baseline that we can all agree on. Now, the protocol used to transmit these measurements in the Netherlands is DLMS-COSEM. This is an IEC standardized protocol used in many more smart meter deployments than just the Dutch one. And DLMS-COSEM allows for encryption. So the smart meter can just encrypt this batch message of some 96 measurements, and an attacker listening in on the link cannot see the measurements in that message. But the encryption as used does leak the message length of the plaintext, because the encrypted the encrypted ciphertext is the same length as the plaintext, and then just a constant length header gets added to the message to tell what encryption it is and stuff like that. So an observer seeing the message length of the encrypted message can compute the message length of plaintext message from that. Now, why is that an issue? Well, we know that message length is a potential side channel that leaks information about the encrypted message. Now, a side channel is just any observable side effect that leaks information about an encrypted message. And well-known side channels are things like the time it takes to encrypt something, or the noise that electrical coils on a mainboard might make while the CPU is encrypting something. But message length as a side channel was first recognized by Kelsey in 2002, and then 10 years later it was hypothesized as a problem for a then new protocol called Speedy in 2011 by Langley, and then just 1 year later it was first used in the crime attack against TLS, and then in another year it was used in the breach attack against HTTP. So all these attacks used the length of encrypted messages to retrieve some secret information that, well, should have been secret. Now, why is that a problem, you might think? Because we have this protocol that just sends 96 measurements. Surely just sending 96 32-bit integers, you're always have the same length message. There's no problem there. Well, yes, but sending these bytes costs money, and we would like to save a bit on our data transmission if it's at all possible. So on the left side here is a picture of my own smart meter, which is telling me I have used 1,573,000 watt hours, which is a 32-bit number. It can't fit in 16 bits. On the right side is my smart meter 1 day later, and it's telling me that I've used 1,576,000 watt hours. Again, a 32-bit number. But the difference between these is just 3,000, which fits in 16 bits. So somebody at DLMS COSAM came up with the idea to use these differences and instead of sending the entire measurements in 32-bit integers, just send the smaller deltas in, well, smaller integers. So the first measurement in the message would still be the 32-bit integer, and then the other 95 measurement would be the smaller deltas. And at this point, we were asked, well, is this a potential problem by the people at Leander? So what we did was we looked at the DLMS COSAM standard, we distilled some possible encodings using delta types from the standard and the test cases in the standard. We did not use an existing implementation of DLMS COSAM, that was not available to us. And we have these cases which are adequately explained in the paper. So these normal and null encodings are already possible for years, and then we have these delta encodings, which were this new proposal, which has now been standardized. And there's basically two ways in which it makes sense to use these delta types. Either you always use the smallest type possible for each measurement. So if you have a delta of 10, use an 8-bit integer, and if you have a delta of 500, you use a 16-bit integer, or you pick a length and you stick with that. So, well, picking 32-bit doesn't make much sense because then you're not improving on the message you already had. But if you pick 16-bit standard length, then the measurements, the 15-bit measurements of a Dutch household will fit into 16 bits. So you save 2 bytes for every measurement there. Now, we came up with an additional trick using the encodings in DLMS COSAM, which allows us to save even more data. And this is a proposal in our paper which improves upon delta encodings even further. But let's not go into the details of all these encodings. Let's just look at are any of these problematic. So what we did was we took a publicly available dataset from Leander, which contains the yearly energy use in 15-minute measurements for around 80 households from the year 2013. And we just encoded all these measurements as these daily batched messages in all these different ways. And we plotted them and we computed correlations on them, and we basically concluded that all these constant length encodings, they are no problem at all. right? We see here on the x-axis, we see daily power consumption, and on the y-axis, we see the message length of these encoded messages, and we see nice straight lines with some outliers that really are not relevant. They're explained in the paper, don't have time to go into them right now. Suffice to say, they don't leak any relevant information here. So we have nice straight lines. There's no correlation between power consumption and message length, except for this green one, which has a slight upward slope. And that slight upward slope turns out to hide a very strong correlation between daily power consumption and data length, which turns out to be a problem, which I'll show you in a bit. Now, fortunately, the 16-bit delta, the pink one, is almost as good as the problematic one, and our proposal, the compact delta, the brown one, outperforms it by quite a significant margin. There's like 200 bytes in between here, maybe even 300. So you can just pick the compact delta encoding and be done with it. It's secure. It doesn't leak this private information that the green one does. But unfortunately, we're not done, because we noticed that the DLMS COSAM standard defines a compression mechanism. And compression here, not to be confused with encoding. You take the message as a whole, you run a compression algorithm over the entire message, you're left with a smaller message, you send that to the other side, there a decompression algorithm is run, you get the original message, and then you can start reading the delta encoded or whatever encoded values from the message. So it's like zipping a file on your hard disk. Now, compression is obviously intended to significantly decrease size, but the actual size after compression depends a lot on the contents of the original message. So we were left with the question, if we compress all these encodings we've made, do we then get problematic correlations? So here are the encodings again, and the compression of each and every one of them results in a problematic correlation. So we get upward slope to the right for all of them. So all of them have a very strong positive correlation between daily power consumption and data length of the message. And this correlation is visible in most households in our data set. Now, to be fair to compression, it is very good at saving data, right? So if I plot these two on top of each other, we see that at the top here we have our baseline, and then moving down, well, we have all these delta encodings, and here is our proposal of compact delta encoding, and then even further below that we get the compressed baseline messages. And then another 100 or 150 bytes below that we get all the other compressed messages. So compression is very good at saving data, but it comes at the cost of introducing this correlation. And that turns out to be a problem, because even though just having a correlation doesn't mean you can do anything with it, but let's look at how that actually looks when we plot the yearly energy use. So let's look at subject 17. So if we take just the daily energy consumption of subject 17 in watt hours on the y-axis here, and we plot each day on the x-axis, we get this graph of daily energy consumption. Now, what we can see here quite clearly is that they went on holiday in June. They had a 2-week-long absence, and then they did that again in September, something like a weekend away in October, and they pretty certainly didn't spend Christmas at home. So that's something we can tell from the power use. But an attacker cannot see the power use. An attacker can only see message length. Now, if we take one of these constant time encodings and plot that, we see, well, just a nice straight line. We can't get anything from that, right? But if we take this uncompressed minimum length delta encoding, the slightly upwardly problematic green line of earlier, we see that it has these valleys here, 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 and here. Now, it has all kinds of other valleys that hit the same value, but only the ones where there's a holiday, they are prolonged. So it already leaks a bit. It's not as I don't have as much confidence as what I'm about to show you, but it already leaks quite a bit of information. But if we do the same thing for the compressed versions, it's actually quite catastrophic. here's the compressed version of the baseline encoding. And what we see is, well, it almost perfectly follows the same value. So 1 in June, 1 in September, 1 at Christmas, 1 in October. And it's quite a strong effect. And if I plot any of the other compressed encodings, we see the same thing. The compressed delta encodings, it's not perfectly overlaid here, but again, we see a valley in June, we see a valley in September, a valley in October, and a very deep valley around Christmas. So we're clearly leaking multi-day absences here, and it's true for every compressed version. And it's not just subject 17. So looking at subject 46, we can see a similar pattern. So what I'm showing you here is subject 46. They were away in February, knowing the Dutch, that's probably a skiing trip. They were away for a long time in July, and another absence in October, but they probably didn't spend Christmas away from home. They were at home for Christmas. What I'm showing you here isn't the yearly energy use. I'm already showing you the message length plotted for each day. So this already leaks day-long absences. And again, this is true regardless of which compressed encoding I show you. So adding the actual energy use here, we see this valley in February, the valley in July, valley in October, nothing at Christmas. Now there may be something going on here in April, which may or may not be as strongly shown in these compressed versions, but that doesn't really matter, right? Because we can see all these other multi-day absences. And again, if I just overlay the compressed versions, we see this effect quite strongly. So this correlation turns out to be quite an important problem. Now, why does this happen? Well, we have two working theories, really. One is that the compression used here is a Lempel-Ziff compression. So it's best for repetitive signals. And if you're away from home, then the only things consuming energy are lamps and duty cycling equipment like freezers. So you get a very repetitive low signal when you're away from home, and when you're at home, it's much more fluctuating. So the repetitiveness of the signal might be the problem. It might also just be how low the numbers are, that the bits of the numbers already introduce a certain repetitiveness, or numbers are more likely to repeat if you have if you just have 0 to 50 versus 0 to 5,000, right? But we haven't really had time to look into this further. And if we look at the least compressible days, then we see, well, you have this very erratic signal, but the numbers also get quite large. So it doesn't really point us in either direction as the right hypothesis. It might also be the case that both are true. So there's some interesting future research that can be done there. Now to conclude, this compression and minimum length delta encoding, we believe, enable traffic analysis on smart meter traffic. We can clearly observe absences of a day, and more frequent transmission will enable more detailed analysis. If you look at, if you start sending one message every 6 hours, we can probably differentiate between working days or days working at the office and days working from home, stuff like that. Now, our fixed length 16-bit compact delta encoding makes traffic analysis impossible by being fixed length. And we show that it does already get pretty close to the gains that you can have from compression. So we believe that such compromise is probably the best way out of this problem. We'd also like to acknowledge that it's very good to see that privacy awareness like this is becoming mainstream. Like for somebody at Leander to just pick up the phone and ask us, hey, can you look at this for us, whether this is a problem for privacy. So that's really good to see. Now, as a more general recommendation, you should ensure that message length is not influenced by private information, right? Message length is a side channel that enables this kind of traffic analysis. So you can just prohibit that kind of encoding whenever privacy-sensitive data is transmitted. There may be other solutions possible, but that is the easiest one, really. Now, if you use the fixed length encoding, then there's usually no problem. Also, we believe you should review the compression mechanism you use to see whether it's suited for the application, and ideally there should be a publicly available version of it so you can do direct analysis. The paper has more details on why this matters. Suffice to say, we had to make some compromises, which are made more concrete in the paper itself. So with that, I will thank you for your attention, and I will be taking some questions now.